All right, today I'll be talking about Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky. I'm going to start initially by talking about his life in general, and then him as a composer, and then on to his one ballet, the Nutcracker, and go into depth about that. Some general facts about him. He was born on May 7th, 1840, and passed away November 6th, 1893. If you were to look up when he was born and when he passed away yourself, you'll see that there's two different dates listed in some places, but this is just due to the fact that Russia was still using the old style dates at the time, and the dates that are listed on the screen right now are the new style dates rather than the old style that Russia was using. He was a Russian composer, and he's actually one of the first Russian composers to make an impression in the world. He was born to Ilya Petrovich Tchaikovsky in Alexandra Andreyevna. He began to study at the age of 4, and this is actually when he his first recorded attempt at making a composition was noted. By the age of 6, with all of his studying, he actually became fluent in French and German on top of being fluent in Russian, his original language. He also began to take piano lessons at the age of 5. And actually, after that, he went on to attend the school. At the age of 10, he began attending the Imperial School of Jurisprudence, which is a boarding school in St. Petersburg. While he was there, his mother passed away when he was only 14 in 1854. And her death greatly impacted Tchaikovsky and actually led him to take music more seriously. And this was when he began his first attempt at composing a waltz. However, he didn't actually finish it at the time, but it was still one of his first noted times where he began to take music more seriously and wanting to pursue it more as a career. Around the age of 15, he began lessons with Rudolf Kundinger. When he was taking lessons with him, he was actually initially told that by Rudolf that he didn't have a future as a composer or performer. Rudolf told him that he believed that his skills just weren't that good and he wasn't going to be able to make a career as a musician, which at the time discouraged Tchaikovsky a lot. But Rudolf Kundinger actually came back later and said that he lied at the time. He did know that Tchaikovsky was a really good musician, really good performer. However, Rudolf Kundinger had a negative experience as a musician in Russia and didn't want Tchaikovsky to go through what he had gone through as a musician. So he was going to try to discourage him because at that time, being a musician wasn't a well-paying job at all. It was actually like a lower job. And he just didn't want that for Tchaikovsky. At the age of 17, Tchaikovsky went on to work under the Italian singer instructor Luigi Piccolo. He was one of the first professionals that Tchaikovsky worked with that appreciated Tchaikovsky's talents and his ability to play. And because of his relationship with Piccolo, Tchaikovsky had a lasting, lifelong passion for the Italian music, which is often incorporated in many of his pieces later on in life. At the age of 21, he decided to take music lessons at the Russian Musical Society. A few months later, he enrolled at the newly founded St. Petersburg Conservatory and became the school's first composition student for music. And while he was there, he gave private lessons to other students and was trying to teach others the musical aspect of compositions and how to write music. And then at the age of 23 in 1863, he moved to Moscow, where he began to work as a professor in the Moscow Conservatory. However, he stayed there for about 15 years, but he resigned in 1878, and then he spent the rest of his career just focusing on composing rather than splitting his time doing different things. His musical career, he's known for instrumental pieces, and in 1865 is when his first work was publicly performed. It was along with Johann Strauss the Younger conducting his characteristic dances at a concert. And then after, it took about 10 years then for Tchaikovsky to become well known. It wasn't until 1875 when he composed Symphony Number 3 in D major where he became well known. So it was about 10 years of him writing music, which goes to show, which is very common at the time, that you may be a good composer, but if you don't have a piece that hasn't been well known yet, you're not going to be well known as a composer. During his lifetime, Tchaikovsky has had over 169 pieces of work, which include symphonies, operas, ballets, concertos, and cantatas. However, his most famous pieces of work were The Sleeping Beauty, which was composed in 1890, and then The Nutcracker, which was composed in 1892. Next, we're going to move on to ballet during the 19th century. You heard a little bit about this in some past presentations, but in 1799, which is technically a year before the 19th century, but basically part of the 19th century, ballet was recognized as a separate entity than the opera. It was no longer considered together, and they were two different separate things. The first 4 decades were the most important part for the history of ballet due to the fact that there are aspects of the Baroque dance which were preserved in the choreography of these dances and ballets. And then it was also during that time where a lot of the storylines and the content of ballet class was established. To continue on, this is also the time period where dancers were changing from males to females during this time period. While it was often the males that are doing things, it was ballets were composed by men and choreographed by men, but dancing wasn't considered a professional job for males anymore. It was actually frowned upon. So dancers slowly transitioned to being only females, and if there was a male character, the females would have to dress for the role. It was also during this point where point ballet became very, very popular. However, the shoes were not created yet. The point shoes that we know today were not created yet. Those didn't appear until around the 20th century. So it is very likely that many of these women had basically destroyed their feet while they were dancing during the 19th century. Tchaikovsky also proved to be successful in changing the aspects of ballet from being just a grand dancing idea to being a stage musical drama as we kind of know it today. It really changed the aspect and is very much what ballet as we know it is today. He also composed 3 ballets. The first one he composed was Swan Lake, which was in 1876, which most people know at this point, followed by Sleeping Beauty, which was composed in 1890, and then The Nutcracker in 1892. Moving on to The Nutcracker. It is a 2-act ballet, and obviously it was composed by Tchaikovsky, and it was choreographed by Marius Petipa and Lev Ivanov. Initially, it was started by Petipa in August of 1892. However, he fell ill and was unable to complete it. So Ivanov, who was Petipa's assistant of 7 years, actually finished the choreography. However, many individuals only consider Ivanov the original choreographer. However, a lot of classical dance individuals and history individuals also consider Petipa to be one of the original choreographers as well. The story is adapted from E.T.A. Hoffman's story, The Nutcracker and the Mouse King. However, the story was a little bit darker, and the um, playwrights didn't, or the individuals writing it for the ballet didn't want it to be as dark as it was in the story, so they changed it a little bit to make it more lighter and not as dark as other aspects. It premiered in the Mariinsky Theater on December 18th, 1892, and was also on a day where Tchaikovsky's opera Lolanta was also performed. Um, However, the original production was not actually successful. It had a lot of criticism because the original dancers for the show were from a school. And a lot of critics considered that they didn't have a good technique. They didn't consider the story, they thought the story changed too much from Hoffman's original story. It just did not have a lot of praise, and a lot of critics just were not very happy with how it went. And was just didn't recommend individuals to go and see it. However, Tchaikovsky took a 20-minute suite from the score, which became very, very popular on like the actual ballet. It wasn't until the 1960s where the full ballet became popular. In some fun current facts, the Nutcracker is now predominantly performed around Christmas in America, and it actually generates over 40% of many dance companies across the nation's revenue for the whole year. Some other changes from the original. The original ballet, children were used for the roles, and then later versions utilized adults rather than children. And then, in order to create a more love interest between Clara and the Nutcracker Prince, which I'll go into more detail in a little bit when I talk about the storyline. And then later stories also eliminated the Sugar Plum Fairy and the Cavalier and her Cavalier, and gave their different dances to Clara and the Nutcracker Prince rather than making it focused on the Sugar Plum Fairy, and helping increase the story and the love interest between Clara and the prince. Music in the Nutcracker. One of the biggest things with the Nutcracker is the utilization of the celesta. This is set up like a piano, as you can see. It looks like a piano. However, when you hit a key, the hammer doesn't hit a string, but rather, like a piano does, but rather hits a set of metal plates or bars. It's more, the sound that it makes is more similar to a glockenspiel or a bell kit, depending what you like to call it. It's more similar to those rather than the sound of a piano, which creates more of a lighter sound and sounds like bells. Tchaikovsky wanted to utilize this because he wanted to, this was actually an instrument that was just starting to make a debut and it was just starting to be used, and a lot of individuals think that he wanted to be one of the first composers to utilize a celesta. However, by utilizing this, it was able to characterize the Sugar Plum Fairy in a different way, and it was also made the music a lot lighter and more had more of a fantasy aspect to it by including the celesta. The music in the Nutcracker is also usually light and sweet during most of the ballet, except for during the battle scene in between the Nutcracker and the Rat Army. The music often utilizes higher notes rather than lower. It's often in a major key rather than minor. Other than the waltzes, the songs were faster. However, the waltzes still had an upbeat to it and were still light. And the music had utilized syncopation rhythms, as you know, with during the if in many of the very common songs that are in the Nutcracker. It also relies on a call and answer, which helps develop the storyline, since ballets don't utilize voices or dialogue. Now I'm going to go into the main story of the Nutcracker. The story starts off it's a Christmas Eve party. Um, and family and friends come to gather at a house of a wealthy family. They have gathered in a parlor to decorate the beautiful Christmas tree in preparation for the party. Um, Once they finish decorating the tree, the children are sent to come in after the adults have finished. The children come in and they're awed by the tree and the candles and the decorations. And then the party begins and a march is played. And presents are starting to be given out to children, kind of a typical Christmas party. But then suddenly, a mysterious figure enters the room, and he's a Drosselmeyer. Um, and a local councilman and a magician and Clara's godfather, um, who also happens to make toys. And with him, he had brought gifts for the children, including lifelike dolls who dance to the delight of all that are at this party. However, he then puts them away for safekeeping, which is very upsetting to the main girl, who is Clara. And she's very sad to see these dolls being taken away. However, the man who had walked in has another gift for them, which is a wooden nutcracker carved in the shape of a little man. However, most of the other children are not a fan of it, but Clara, the main girl, ends up liking it. However, her brother ends up breaking it, which is very upsetting to Clara. A little bit later, everyone ends up going to bed. However, Clara returns to the parlor because she wanted to see the Nutcracker. And as she reaches his bed, the clock ends up hitting midnight, and all of a sudden the room begins to fill with mice, and the Christmas tree all of a sudden grows, and the Nutcracker grows to life size. And then Clara finds herself in this battle in between rats and the Nutcracker, which is leading a battle of gingerbread soldiers. However, the mice end up attacking the Nutcracker and end up wounding him, but Clara throws her slipper at him, distracting the rat long enough so the Nutcracker can kill the Mouse King. After this, it ends up going, the Nutcracker transforms into a prince and ends up taking Clara to a forest, which then begins the story of Act 2. Clara and Prince end up traveling to this land of sweets, which is ruled by the Sugar Plum Fairy, who was ruling in the place of the prince until he returned. And the prince ends up telling the story about how Clara saved him from the Mouse King, and there ends up being a celebration of Clara as a heroine. And they all celebrate the fact that the prince is back, and that night ends with the Sugar Plum Fairy and her cavalier performing a dance for Clara and the prince. However, the final waltz is performed by all the sweets, where Clara is ushered into a sleigh and she waves goodbye to all of her subjects, and she ends up going back to her house, and that's the end of the play. In the end of the ballet, not play, my bad. In this ballet, there's a couple of different romantic themes present. There's definitely the supernatural, because at that time it is not normal for all of a sudden a doll to become a human or mice to be having battles with a prince. And it was also the aspect of the prince being turned into a nutcracker and having to kill this Mouse King in order to become a prince again is very, very different. It also has the aspect of the light versus dark, from the light with the Sugar Plum Fairies and the darkness of the mice battle. There's also the aspect and change of nature, of animals rising up and actually attacking. But there's also a lot of emotions within it that are portrayed by the dances and the different waltzes, which is different in the time because in a lot of operas they're singing, which can cause the emotion, but in ballets they rely on the dance and the music to portray the different emotions which was very different during that time. But that is all I have. These are the resources that I used to create this presentation. And yeah.